But Dogen himself has come to be respected much more as a thinker in recent years. He wrote voluminously. Eisai didn't write anything like this much. Dogen, I think, together with the great Shingon monk Kukai, ranks as one of the two greatest Buddhist thinkers in Japanese history. And a large quantity of Dogen's writing has now been translated into English. I have at home a whole shelf of books about Dogen. Another thing I should mention to you is the Gozan tradition. Gozan means 5 mountains, and Wushan in Chinese. And these were 5 monasteries traditionally being set on mountains. And then a Japanese list of 5 monasteries developed. There was one for Kamakura and another one for Kyoto. And they're called Gozan too, 5 mountains, even though they're metropolitan monasteries, which are not on mountains at all. It's rather like the Navy, which all naval stations are Majesty's ships. They're on dry land. So it's the same with these Gozan monasteries. So there's a concentration of Gozan monasteries in Kamakura and in Kyoto. And they're invited often to head these monasteries distinguished Chanmans from China itself. Throughout its history, Zen has owed a great deal to patronage of emperors or shoguns or senior military aristocrats. One of the most famous monasteries in Kyoto was Daitokuji, which was founded in 1324 by the Emperor Go-Daigo, and where it has very close connections with the development of the tea ceremony in Kyoto. Just briefly a word about Chan or Sun in Korea. In Korea, it also goes back to the 9th century, and there were 9 branches of Sun Buddhism which developed in different parts of Korea. But then, in the 15th century, the Korean Emperor Sejong reduced the number from 7 to 2, and there was further unification. In 1935, the Choge order was founded, and that's now the main representative school of Korean Buddhism. I should mention that there's also a 3rd school of Japanese Zen, the Waterhouse school, which was again founded with patronage in the 17th century. A distinguished Chinese monk was invited to come and set up shop at Manbokuji, just outside Kyoto. And Obaku Zen is different from either Rinzai or Soto. It incorporates much more of the Pure Land traditions, the worship of Amitabha. Let's turn now to the tea ceremony. It should be a more straightforward topic, but it's complicated because it's so intertwined with the history of the Japanese culture and the arts. The drinking of tea in East Asia goes back many, many centuries, long before it reached Japan. And there was a text called the Chajin, written by Liu Yu in the 8th century, a Tang author, Tang Dynasty author. I have in my bag there an English translation of it, if anyone would like to see that afterwards. But then tea drinking began to spread in Japan through the work of Asai, founder of the Rinzai School, and I mentioned this text which he wrote. But it wasn't just, the tea ceremony as such did not exist in that date. It was a long time before anything approaching what's familiar to you today developed. There were various transitional stages. One, for example, was the Obukucha, which was the offering of tea to the Buddha. Tea cultivation also had to develop, and Asai helped in that respect. There were tea plantations that were set up in various Japanese provinces from the 15th century onwards, especially at Buddhist monasteries. Then, from the end of the from the 14th century onwards, we see tea tasting contests. You'll know that in Japan they love to have little competitions, and poetry competitions, incense competitions, all sorts of games. And so there were tea drink tasting contests, or tocha, and the object of which was not to judge the quality of the tea so much as to identify the region from which it came. And so that was a kind of party game. Tea was in Japan something to which you invited people for entertainment more than anything else. But gradually rules for the drinking of tea began to be fixed from the mid-14th century onwards, and an aesthetic of tea developed. Rules of behavior at the tea ceremony, and then above all the setting of the tea room, the chashitsu, the tea room, developed though from a meeting room, or kaisho, which was just a place for social meeting like this room, or maybe not quite as big. And then there was the next stage was the shoin. The shoin literally means a book room, an interior room which would have a writing desk in it, for example, in the house of some well-to-do person. I mentioned that Zen monasteries were important in all this, and the group life of Zen monasteries was clearly important, attractive to members of the samurai class, and they early on began to patronize the tea these parties for the drinking of tea, as I said earlier, rules of behavior for Zen monks were being written as well. Dogen himself wrote a text on how monks ought to behave, and other Zen monasteries had analogous sets of rules, which covered, among other things, the drinking of tea, or sare. And the tea ceremony, Cha-no-yu, literally means drinking of hot water, and the tea in hot water emerged from this. And the earliest tea drinking type was something called Yotsugashira, which means 4 hosts, and it took place in a room decorated with Chinese and Japanese treasures, and people just lined up at the seats of the 4 hosts who were sitting in a row, and you had to admire the various objects in the room. This short-in form of tea ceremony, the study room, got established within the military aristocracy. To me, it sounds a little bit like officers' mess dinners. But and you should realize that for many centuries, until modern times, in fact, the tea ceremony was strictly for men only. In modern times, it's become largely for women only. And that's a whole story, which perhaps we don't have time to go into. but there was a taste for, going back for many centuries in Japan, was something of a ding-dong battle between the love for Chinese things and Japanese things, which you see in poetry, in painting, and many art forms. In the Tale of Genji, for example, there's a whole chapter about they have a picture contest, and different participants bring out their treasures of painting. And of course, it's the Japanese paintings which win here. So this was this taste for Chinese objects, which generally speaking are more gaudy than the Japanese ones, went on for a long time. But then the tea room itself, and associated with this was the development of the alcove, the tokonoma, and its decoration. And there were various people who came to be arbiters of taste to the shoguns. There were some of them who fell in, some fell out of favor and had to commit suicide, including the greatest tea master of all, Senno Rikyu, who was forced to commit suicide. But some of these people were not followers of Zen particularly, but of a school of Pure Land Buddhism, Ami, and three in particular, grandfather, father, and son, No Ami, Ge Ami, and So Ami, were responsible for looking after the shogun's art collections, and they compiled a vast catalogue of it, which also contains various rules for decorating tea rooms, and even advice about flower arrangement. And so this text by the Ami was one of the first things, texts on flower arrangement. We have no more time. Oh dear, yes, all right. Let's look quickly at some images that I